At the time, I was in grad school at the University of Miami, and I was in the producing segment. And one of the big things that was pounded into our heads was find a story and option it. It turned out that the guy that I've been living with for like the past 7 years was an Australian. And how the story came about was I had been getting phone calls from his mom. And his mom was telling me about her hard luck story, her hard-going story about how she grew up in an orphanage in the outback. But when I started listening to this, she said to me, you know, Jody, it's really not about me. I can give you a story that is unbelievable. He's in the press right now. He's a friend of mine. He's probably had the worst case of child abuse out of the orphanage we came from.
Well, at the time you asked me about my story, I kind of wasn't quite in the mood for going into it all, to be quite honest. I think I wanted to offload it onto David, but I didn't realise just how far it was going to go.
Well, of course, I'm like going, I don't really want to do this because it's a hard-going story, and I'm like, no, I don't think I want to take on such a tragic thing. So what does she do? She has David Owen call me, this gentleman, her friend, who was in the same orphanage she was. And the minute I picked up the phone and talked to him and heard that lovely lilting accent with this most amazing, compassionate voice, I was hooked. And before I knew it, there were boxes and boxes of documents being shipped to my house in Florida from Newcastle, Australia. I called David up finally, and it was a lot of soul-searching on my part. And I said to him, and it was hard, because I said, you know what, Dio? I said, I understand that your story is important to get out. I understand that you were sodomized, brutalized, raped, been in prison, had the nuns and priests have government apologies from the Catholic Church, the state of Queensland. You've got all of this. You're in front of the United Nations right now. But I said, and this was the hard part to say to an abuse victim, but what makes your story any different than anybody else's?
Children in orphanages, she says, the children in the orphanages are members of an extremely happy family, and it can safely be said that they have far more enjoyment than any other child in their own homes. They could never be as well off or feel as happy as their accommodation at the orphanage.
So he sits down and he writes me this page of why it's important that he should have his story told.
In 1958, 9 of 10 inspectors were responsible for overseeing 6,602 children in state care.
And I got to tell you, he mailed it to me, and it's in his handwriting, which, by the way, even though he was schooled by the Catholic Church and it was paid for by the Queensland government, he's a functional illiterate, okay?
The Department appeared generally to have ceded responsibility for protecting children from abuse to the institutions, to the extent of allowing the institution almost unlimited direction as to the adults to whom children in care could be exposed. You know, they just did not care.
Well, literally, the document got so wet after I just sobbed and sobbed my eyes out. That was it. I said, okay, Jody, we're going to turn it around. And I said to David this. I said, you know what, I'm going to take your story on, but what I'm going to do is we're not going to make it all about kill, crush, and destroying all these institutions that hurt you. We're just going to turn it around, we're going to shed some light on it, and then we're going to bring it out into the open so that other people can be healed. 1938, Australia, gold mining town. 13-year-old girl working for her grandmother's boarding house goes to pick up the local constable's laundry, gets raped by the constable. The constable doesn't want anyone to know she's having the baby. The baby gets sent away to a hospital. The family wants to get the baby. The government hides the baby in this hospital. They want to get it to an adoptive family. That doesn't happen because the constable wants it to go out to this orphanage. The baby is taken out of the arms of the adoptive family. It's taken out on this train and sent out to what they call the devil's playground, Neerkol. Why aren't the solicitors touching it now? Well, there's sort of, it's not just why aren't they touching it now? It's a train. It started out with the first solicitor in '93 that took it on because it was a big controversy. And it was all over the world press, and this orphanage was terrible. And what happened was it went from the first to the second, and each time they'd look at it, they'd see what it was taking on, and they didn't want to touch it because A, it was too time-consuming. There was no money in it for them up front.
I would like, obviously, the Queensland Government to hand more than an apology to them. Not because he needs the money, not because money is really the issue, but the money has to be commensurate with the sin. I mentioned before, that's in the Catechism. It's not a question of whether. That is how redemption occurs.
It's the statute of limitations. The government's hiding behind it now. Every solicitor says, we don't want to touch it because we don't want to fight that hard. There's not enough money in it for us. And the one thing that I would want to tell everybody about him, and why I still will do this story no matter what, is because for somebody who's gone through the kind of amazing and outrageous and cruel and devastating childhood, you would never meet anybody like this. I met my first larrikin, and that was my first Australian word, actually, larrikin.
And he always made us happy. He made us laugh.
Right.
And I think it's for that reason I remembered him so much.
Yes.
He just put a bit of spark into our lives.
Larrikin is somebody that is like a jokester. He's a prankster, and no matter what, he always wants everybody to feel good. And that was the thing about D.O. that I knew just from the phone conversation, but when I met him in person, it was funnier. For all that's happened to him in the Catholic Church, which is not, the story is truly not about Catholic Church abuse, it's just about the will to survive. The point is that this guy, in an American, as an American, I see him as a cross between Will Rogers, Newt Rockney, and St. Francis of Assisi. And he actually can hold up to all three of those things. The man has so much compassion and love at every given moment of his life that I wonder, I keep looking at him, and that's why, too, having him here helped me to understand a little bit more about why I would feel the need to really want to get his story out there.
And there's no pretense about him. His life's been full of tragedy and triumph because he's overcome the tragedy to make something of his life. So when he tells his story, you can't really be touched by it.
The story truly is pure and simple, and it's really important to society. It's the common denominator is human spirit triumphs over the darkness. That's all we got.